How's it going? My name is Levi, and I want to talk to you about The Last of Us, Episode 1 on HBO Max. This isn't a review, not really. I will give my thoughts about how good it was, because it was excellent. It was a great freaking episode. I really enjoyed it, but I more wanted to talk about just some things I noticed and see if anyone else had thoughts on them. First off, the show, again, is excellent. At least this episode, with scenes taken right from the game, which is a game I really enjoy playing. I played through it twice, and I'm not a big gamer. So anyways, back to the episode. Episode 1, great, fantastic. Everyone loves it. As far as I can tell, everyone loves it. I haven't really done a lot of looking at reviews because I did watch the episode and I thought it was great. I don't need to know what other people think about it. But I wanted to talk about a couple of the changes I saw from the game to the episode that I'd like to know your thoughts on as well. But let's talk about the change they made to Joel. Not the obvious change. Tell me if I'm right to be worried about this change they made to Joel's storyline. In the game, Joel is a hopeless guy. In the show, he's a hopeless guy as well, but more so in the game. And I think it shows through his motivations. And if you haven't seen it, this might be spoilers, whatever. I got the slippers on. I don't necessarily want to break down the entire episode scene by scene, full review. Did you notice this change to Joel's storyline, and is it important? Do you care? Do you think it's going to change the story further down the road? And that's the change to Joel's motivations in this episode versus the game. If you haven't seen the show or played the game, and you don't know what it's about, this is probably a spoiler. In the game and in the show, clicker apocalypse, whatever you want to call it, the world is destroyed, taken over by these creatures and bands of terrible people. And the federal government has set up walled cities. The federal government has set up walled cities, camps, where they have complete control of everything that's going on, ration cards, curfews, all that good stuff. The stuff some people worry about. They're building camps. You know what I'm talking about. That was my Alex Jones. But in the game, Joel, living in this walled city, is a man without hope. His motivations are just survival, selfish, simple survival. He's not doing anything remotely heroic. He doesn't care about anyone. In the game, it seems as though his only care is himself and his survival, and even that's tenuous. But in this episode, they give him these little touches of humanity that he doesn't have in the game. Again, if you haven't seen it, go watch it. I'm trying to explain it to you. The driving force for him to escort Ellie across the country in the game isn't to find his brother. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. It was purely to get some guns. Joe makes some deal with a guard, and we find out that he is hoping for a battery for a vehicle so that he can drive across the country, because he hasn't heard from his brother Tommy in a while, and he's worried about him. In the game, that's not the case. In the game, he is trying to buy guns. And so that little change in his motivation, I'm wondering if it's going to lead to a change in this overall character's development. Another part that's tied into that directly is when they confront Robert. Robert is the guy who is trying to sell them the battery in the episode, and in the game, he's the guy who's supposed to sell them guns. But then he sells them to the Firefly. In the episode, they come across Robert dead already, having gotten into a firefight with the Fireflies over a car battery. But in the game, Tess and Joel find him first and murder him. To be fair, Tess does the murdering, but Joel isn't bothered by it. They murdered him, and they changed that in the episode. To me, this is a Han shot first moment. Let's not make the scoundrel too bad. We want people to be able to know that that guy's got some heart. diamond in the rough. If you play the game and you know how it ends, the nihilistic tone that it ends with, do you think that these changes to Joel's character are going to affect the end? Out of any other changes, I wasn't really bothered. They gave some extra backstory to Joel and his daughter, Sarah. The lines and shots that were almost one for one from the game, beautiful. Let me tell you, I'm pretty sure I cried. Let's not say cried. I was emotionally impacted. Like I might have shed a tear or two at the game when Sarah died. That's a spoiler. But the episode, I think the impact was even more powerful because we did get a little extra of their lives. So some of the additions, most of the additions didn't bother me. Most of the changes didn't bother me. Even the diversity and inclusion changes didn't bother me. They weren't the focus. But that one worries me a little bit. Are we worried there's going to be a happier ending? Is that something? Or, conversely, let me know. Do we want a happier ending? That could be a thing. Here's another thing I wanted to touch on. I don't know if any of you noticed, or if anyone else out there has talked about this narrative shift that I noticed. Let's start with the first scene, the cold open. We got two doctors talking about what's going to do humanity in. And the first says pandemic, a word that we're all familiar with. We all know what a pandemic is. We all know what a pandemic is. And the second doctor comes along and he says something that I'm not sure would have been said a year ago. He essentially says that, hey, humanity will survive. This pandemic that you're talking about, meh, that's not going to do us in. Humanity has adapted to bacteria and viruses. We'll survive those things. No need to worry. What we need to worry about is fungus. And he lays out a very frightening case for it. I know it's a fake show, but I've seen those videos with those ants and the stuff growing out the head, and that shit's scary. But do you think that is a shift in the narrative that we've seen in TV, in movies, in news, in commercials, what we've seen on Facebook, YouTube, what's been allowed to be spoken about across social media? Is this a narrative shift, and why? And that's not the only part. The other part I wanted to touch on was towards the end, the Fireflies are presented as freedom fighters, fighting for democracy. At one point, Marlene, the leader of the Fireflies, even talks about democracy and how important it is. So I'm assuming that the Fireflies are being presented as, I think they're being painted as the good guys on some level. And they're fighting against a federal government who has walled in its people. They are the democratic, loving freedom fighters fighting against a tyrannical government. But another word that we are familiar with over the past year or two is insurrection. We are all familiar with the word. And I find it interesting that later in the episode, there is a loudspeaker blaring its message in the walled-in city of Boston. And its message is, stay indoors to fight infection and insurrection. To fight infection and insurrection. And they're talking about the Fireflies, for all intents and purposes, again, democracy-loving freedom fighters. Do you find that interesting? I find that interesting. Is this a narrative shift? And if so, why? But just so you know, I lean right. I lean so far right. Those of us on the right, we know and we've seen Eric July and ISOM, things like The Chosen, shows and comics and IP that aren't necessarily even right-leaning. They just aren't super left-leaning. Shows that aren't pushing a particular ideal, a particular agenda, a particular mindset, a particular narrative, the narrative shift. a particular narrative. We know that shows that aren't pushing a particular narrative have done pretty well in the last year or so. Used that word, insurrection, in reference to heroes. I don't think we would have heard that a year ago as well. I don't think we would have heard that 6 months ago either. Another one that I wanted to touch on, maybe not as big, but I still noticed it, was the treatment of the elderly neighbors at the beginning of the episode. They were treated like elderly neighbors. I think they treated them well. They were an elderly Christian couple. Sure, the theology was apparently from Hobby Lobby. 1 cross plus 3 nails equals 4 given. That wasn't necessarily a demeaning mockery of these old people. They were presented as a pleasant enough old couple. We've all seen plenty of shows where we've all seen plenty of TV shows, movies, whatever you want to talk about, where the Christians are bad. They're the bad guys. Presented as hateful bigots, you know the story. They're evil. They're closed-minded. But they didn't do that in this episode. They were just presented as an old couple. But those are just some things I noticed. And I'm wondering if you think this is a shift in the narrative and why. As I said before, the episode itself, overall fantastic. I don't have a complaint. I liked it. And I'm looking forward to the second episode tonight. But one more thing I want to talk about. I think if The Last of Us continues in the same quality and tenor and tone as this first episode, it's going to give HBO Max 2 things. The first being a hit, which, they want. I think they have a hit. Like Game of Thrones, this is a show that will grow in popularity as people tell more people about it. It's not going to grow in popularity because of the advertising. It's because I will tell my brother to watch it. It's because I will tell my friends to watch it. I don't have any friends. I'll tell the cashier if it comes up. If it continues in this quality, following the game as well as it did. The second thing that I think it's going to give HBO Max is the notable honor of producing what might be the best video game adaptation ever. We've all been let down by adaptations for a long time. And there's been a few comic book adaptations that have done really well. But video games, they haven't done it. But if the series keeps up this quality of adaptation, scenes taken from the game, tone, tenor, everything about it, the overall atmosphere, this might be the best. Do you agree? And it should also, even just this one episode, should serve as a benchmark for other studios to look at and see what it is exactly that we as fans want from our adaptations. Please don't change the age of our characters. Don't bring them into the real world. Don't add unnecessary backstory, unnecessary love stories. Don't change their motivations. Give us the things that we've seen that we want to see. I understand some things don't translate directly from comics to screen, from video game to movie, but let's be honest. The things that you're trying to adapt aren't flops. They're hits for a reason. They've made millions of dollars because people enjoy them, particularly your story-based games. It's the story that people are interested in. It's the story that people get engaged in. If a story-based game has a shitty story, no one's going to enjoy it. It's not going to sell. The problem is there are people out there who haven't played the game, who don't want to play video games. There are people out there who think video games are dumb, who think they're a waste of time. There are people out there who think video games are stupid. They haven't been exposed to the story in the game, The Last of Us, and they don't know how good it is. And those of us who have played the video game, we want that story. We don't want a side story. We don't want a changed story. We want that story. It's a good story. The story was so good, it got me to play through twice. I'm a casual gamer. I'm a very casual gamer. But for studios that are trying to cash in on money-making IPs out there, just give us the things that we've seen. we love them. Just like there are people who don't want to play video games because they think they're childish, there are far more people who don't want to read comic books because they think they're childish. So remove that video game, that comic book aspect of it, and just present the story that we fell in love with, the fans of these things, the fans fell in love with, and other people will fall in love with it too, because it's the story and the characters that brought us in, that made us love it. But if you happen to see this and you enjoyed it, hit like, and if you agree or disagree, leave a comment. Let's talk about it. Tell me what you think. Did you notice the things I talked about? Then do you agree with them? And also, if you would, I designed some t-shirts, trying to sell them. Head over to my Spreadshirt page. I'll leave the link in the description. Thank you for watching. My coffee's gone, so I'm gonna call it quits. Have a good one.